Right, hello again. We're here with Nigel from Arington's. Hello, Nigel. Welcome to you.
Hello, Peter. Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Now you're going to talk to us about the Tenant Fees Act, which has become absolute. A lot of people say, "What does it mean becoming absolute?" So you took us. I know you've got a presentation. So over to
Yes,
you.
indeed. So, yeah, I did a presentation last year at iHowz. Obviously, a different climate then. We were able to
Yeah.
all meet with each other. But let me redo that presentation. I've just tweaked it slightly, obviously. But let me redo that presentation for you now. Just remind everyone of the details.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, I shall share my screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Tenants Fees Act 2019. It came into play on the 1st of June 2019, and there's been a transition period of 12 months, which ended on the 31st of May 2020. So from the 1st of June 2020, a few days ago now, the Tenants Fees Act is in full force and effective on all tenancies at the moment. So I thought what it was best to do is just to rerun through my presentation originally and just do a quick reminder of what the Tenants Fees Act is. And who it applies to. So who does the ban affect? Well, the ban affects letting agents, landlords, and any third-party services if it is a requirement of the landlord or letting agent to, for example, for a reference, you can't insist that a reference is done through a certain firm and that firm charges a fee. If you insist upon that, that fee is deemed as part of the ban and it would be a breach of the Tenants Fee Act. So it affects letting agents and landlords. Eligibility for that, it affects the ASTs, so Assured Short Hold Tenancies Agreements, and licenses only. It doesn't apply to long leases, non-housing tenancy acts, tenancy agreements, social tenancy, company lets, or holiday lets. So it's Assured Short Hold Tenancies and licenses only. So what is the Tenants Fees Act 2019? It is a total ban of all fees, charges and loans payable by tenants and or guarantors unless they are a permitted payment. And an extract from the Tenants Fees Act simply says a payment is a prohibited payment unless it is a permitted payment. So what is a permitted payment? What are we allowed to charge our tenants? Permitted payments. Pleased to see rent still remains, obviously. Utilities, tenants still remain responsible for utilities. Tenant security deposit, holding deposit, and tenant default fees. Let's explore these in a bit more detail. Sorry, there's an example of some banned fees and charges. So you can't charge tenants anymore for referencing, arranging, granting, renewals or continuances of tenancies, tenant setup fees, third-party inventories, check-ins, check-outs, insurance charges, referencing fees, rent guarantor fees, etc. So all fees that you can imagine, unless they're permitted, they're non-chargeable. Rent is chargeable. That is something that tenants are allowed to pay a landlord, and it's allowed to be detailed. But you cannot change the rent from period to period, i.e. put in a higher rent in month one and then for it to reduce in later months. So the rent has to remain at the same level for a period of the tenancy agreement, either 6 or 12-month tenancy. Utilities, so the tenant remains responsible for your utilities, so your council tax, electricity, gas and water. If they want to take out television licenses, broadband or other TV packages, etc., they remain responsible for all those. Holding deposits. Holding deposits have been capped at a maximum of 1 week's rent. So a landlord is only permitted to take one holding deposit per property at a time, and you have to return that within 15 days unless you agree in writing a later date or an alternative date. If the tenant fails for certain reasons to proceed with that tenancy, the landlord or agent can withhold that holding deposit, 1 week's rent. They can hold that where the tenant pulls out, fails to take reasonable steps to enter into the tenancy, fails to the right to rent checks, or provides false or misleading statements. Now, you would have to prove that they've provided you with false or misleading statements at this point. So your application form needs to ask very straightforward questions which can't be misled at all. Is your income over £20,000? as a gross income per year, for example, yes or no. Has the tenant answered yes or no? If they answer yes and you prove that they're not, then obviously that's false or misleading information that's been provided. If you do retain that holding deposit from your tenants, you must put it in writing to the tenant within 7 days and the reason as to why you're retaining that holding deposit. If you're not retaining that, you must refund that holding deposit within 7 days if the landlord or agent pulls out for any reason, or if that tenant is successful in passing the referencing. That can be agreed in writing to be at a later date, so you can use that against the security deposit or against the first month's rent. But again, you need to make sure that that is in writing. Tenancy security deposits. Security deposits have been capped at either 5 weeks rent or 6 weeks rent. 5 weeks rent where the rent is under £50,000 and 6 weeks rent where the rent is over £50,000. I reiterate that it is capped at 5 weeks rent. So it's always best to make sure you go slightly under if you're in any doubt, and just take a nice round figure on the rental, on the security deposit. Tenants can use tenancy deposit replacement products, but they must have the option of either paying a security deposit in the standard way or the replacement product. You cannot insist that they use a tenancy replacement product. Default fees. So there are default fees that apply to tenants and that you can charge for. They are rent arrears, but they can only be charged after the tenant has been in arrears for 14 days. The rent arrears are 3% above the Bank of England base rate. Once the tenant has been in arrears for 14 days, you can backdate that to when the arrears started. Lost keys you can charge for. Default fees must now be written into the tenancy agreement, otherwise you will not be able to charge for them. And they must be on your upfront fee schedule, so your application form for the tenants when they're submitting that to you. They must be reasonable costs incurred. And they must be supported by evidence, i.e. receipts. So guidance is keys. You would lead the receipts for a locksmith or agent, etc. The cost of getting those keys cut. You can charge for a change of sharer within the property or a change of the agreement, etc. And those costs again have to be reasonable. They are capped at £50. If you were going to go higher than the £50, you have to be able to prove what those costs are that you've incurred and prove that you have incurred a higher cost. But it's unlikely that it would be accepted. So the recommendation is that they are capped at £50. With the surrender of tenancy, the loss or the fee charged to the tenant cannot exceed the loss suffered by the landlord or reasonable costs incurred by the letting agent. Exemptions, the Green Deal is exempt, so the Green Deal you can still charge for, but again, it must be outlined in the tenancy agreement prior to the tenancy starting. You must provide the tenant with all that information so they're fully aware. So some questions, a couple of questions that we've received over the last 12 months. And an obvious one is, if I hold a security deposit for more than 5 weeks or the 6 weeks rent, do I have to repay the excess amount? Well, a reminder, from the 1st of June, you must not have taken a security deposit over the 5 weeks or the 6 weeks rent. That's the 1st of June 2019. So if you have taken a deposit for more than the 5 or 6 weeks since that date, yes, you must, without question, refund the excess amount that you hold. If you have a tenancy that started prior to the 1st of June 2019, if you have renewed that tenancy at any point and created a new fixed period tenancy, then yes, at that point, you should return the excess amount that you hold as a security deposit. If you haven't done that, then yes, you need to do that with immediate effect. If the tenancy has evolved from a contractual or statutory periodic tenancy, originally signed prior to the 1st of June 2019, then there is some debate as to whether you need to refund the excess amount that's held. I know Peter actually had a video with Rob Bolwell from Dutton Gregory last week, I believe it was, and again, questioning the points there, so again, refer to that video. Some other questions, pets. And just some points: you can no longer increase the security deposit, obviously, to cover the additional potential liability of having pets. So how do we get around this? You can't charge upfront fee for that at all. How do you protect it? Then what a lot of agents are doing and a lot of landlords are doing they're doing two separate rents, where the rent is simply increased slightly if the tenants wish to have pets at the property. Again, this must be in the advert. If it's not in the advert when you're advertising the property, it would be deemed as a prohibited payment and in breach of the Tenant Fees Act. So it must be listed when advertising the property. Questions to ask, letting agents, do they still charge you for a pet addendum? What costs do you need to cover? So flea treatment, dog gnawing, damage, etc. How long is the tenancy length? These are all questions that will then work out what you're prepared to accept as an additional increase on the tenancy if the tenants have pets. Again, just to confirm, if you are offering property to pets, it must be in the advert. Enforcement, there's quite serious enforcement and fines and penalties should you fail or breach the Tenants Fees Act at all. It will be enforced by trading standards or district councils. The penalties for prohibited payments are first that you must return that prohibited payment. For the first offence, the fine is £5,000. For further offences within 5 years, it can be up to £30,000, and it's per offence. But the big issue is obviously that the Section 21 can be used and may be thrown out if you ever reach court if you've taken a prohibited payment and not returned that prohibited payment. So if you're in doubt at all, the advice is to return the payment if you've taken the fee and you're unsure. Again, with the security deposit, if you're unsure, then return the excess amount that you have. So a quick recap: maximum of 1 week's rent as a holding deposit, maximum of either the 5 or 6 weeks rent as a security deposit. The holding deposit can go towards the first month's rent or security deposit with the tenant's consent, so it must be in your application forms. No fees can be charged unless they are permitted fees, which has been specified. The permitted fees must be written into your tenancy agreements now to be enforceable. Any tenancy agreements currently in place where you have other fees written into those tenancy agreements are no longer enforceable. If you try to charge for them, it would be a prohibited fee and it would be a breach of the ban. Any non-permitted fees must be returned to the tenants. Thank you, Peter. Hopefully that's a quick recap. I've whizzed through that, but hopefully people will be able to pause the slides on the video just to make sure that they're fully up to speed with those.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much. So you're going to go back to it so we can see you again. So
yes, let me stop sharing the screen and I'll reappear.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, a few things that came out of that. Just want to briefly explain to people ASTs and licenses.
Yes.
Just basically to say, if you meet the criteria for an AST, you've got an AST. A license is generally that a holiday let would be a license or a resident landlord would be a license. It's where a tenant or a lodger, you can't call them tenants, where a lodger does not have the exclusive right to that property. So some people do try issuing licenses and generally they can't. So they're a bit of a rare beast, so be careful about those. This thing about rent being the same across the period, we had an interesting one on the helpline a couple of days ago. Somebody saying, I want to take a smaller rent at the outset at the first.
Right.
Ah, right, okay.
Okay, yeah.
Can, because it says it's got to be equal. It's obviously designed to stop higher rents, but it's also to stop lower rents. So why do you want to charge a lower rent? It's going to cause total confusion. So
yes,
I've never heard that before. So
yeah.
We have a bit of a recommendation, the holding deposit. I've personally got a bit of a worry that if you put it towards a security deposit, some no-win fee lawyer somewhere is going to argue that was a security deposit from day one. And
right, okay. The advice at the moment is if you take a holding deposit,
yep,
the date that holding deposit is deemed to be your security deposit is the date that the tenancy agreement is executed.
Does it actually say that in law somewhere?
Yeah, I haven't seen it on the Tenants Fees Act.
Right.
That's advice from Arla. So the Association of Residential
Because
Letting
it's as
Agents.
broad as it is long, but we all say to people, put it towards the rent, not the security deposit.
Yes, correct.
It ends up as being the same thing.
Correct.
It just gets, again, we have to say that this, like most acts that come out of Parliament these days, it's dreadfully badly written, full of holes, and something like that. Some clever lawyer, no win, no fee lawyer will jump on that one.
Yeah. And the government guidance contradicts the Tenants Fees Act, doesn't it?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Act will probably take precedence, possibly. But there have been cases in the past where judges have gone by the guidance. So,
yes,
it is a bit difficult. Yeah, you mentioned that any fees or charges or whatever have to be in the AST. They always have to have been. So if you didn't have, this is the point being there, if you've got an old AST, which is still ongoing, which is absolutely no problems, unless you've got something in there about you're going to charge something or another, you can't charge it. You've never been able to charge it, so make sure it's in your agreement.
yes.
Another question we get quite often, I don't know how you handle it, is cleaning. Because, of course, cleaning itself per se is a banned fee.
Yeah.
But what we say to people is, as long as you've got a good inventory and a good check-in, then the checkout, if the checkout says it's got to be clean to put it back to the same condition, then somebody somewhere's got to clean it to put it back to the same condition to allow fair wear and tear. But you cannot insist on an outside firm doing the cleaning.
Yeah.
Because the tenant may well be careful.
There's two scenarios here. One, if you're wanting to charge for cleaning during the tenancy, you can't charge a rent and then charge a tenant for cleaning. That would be a banned fee and prohibited, a breach of the Tenants Fees Act. You can charge a tenant, obviously, a slightly higher rent to include the cleaning. And as part of the tenancy, you include cleaning within that. So that's one scenario. The second scenario is come the end of the tenancy and the tenant's responsibilities for returning the property in the same condition it's provided with the allowance of fair wear and tear. Now, the deductions that you can submit to the deposit protection schemes hasn't changed. So you can submit fees and costs that you incur due to putting the property back to the condition it was presented in at the commencement of the tenancy with the allowance of fair wear and tear. Now, cleaning is always a debate. Again, you can't specify in the tenancy agreement that the tenant must pay for it to be professionally cleaned. You have to allow that tenant to have the opportunity to return the property to the same standard. Now, if they're a professional cleaner themselves, they might return it to that same standard. So you won't need to employ anyone to obviously get it back to that standard. But if they fail to, then yes, you can still employ a cleaner and you can recharge those costs against the security deposit at the end of the tenancy.
Yeah, I think that the important word there is standard.
Yes.
As long as you got in there, it's good. It's that it's changed to the same. Gone to. I just managed to disconnect my microphones, put it back again. So, and then the last thing I've got on my notes here is just worth stating that the second offence you mentioned there is actually a criminal offence, whereas the first one's a civil offence. So, it's serious stuff. Don't get it wrong.
Yeah, it's rather daunting, to be honest, isn't it? But yeah, again, if you're in any doubt at all, return the fee you've charged and return the excess of the security deposit. And, again, with the amount that you take on the holding deposit and security deposit, don't necessarily go for exactly 1 week's rent or exactly 5 weeks' rent as a security deposit. Take slightly under, and therefore you're always just ensuring that you're not in breach of the agreement.
And again, we've tended to say to people, don't tell the tenant it's X weeks rent, because they'll treat it as X weeks rent. So if you were going to take £1,000, which is for 5 weeks rent, say, just get the figures easy, well, you take £950 as £950. Because we always do it, we just equate it to that number of weeks rent. Therefore, it's the last month's rent, isn't it? So.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So why even go down that route?
Exactly.
All right, Nigel, that's great. Thank you so much for doing that. That's really, really useful. So I have absolutely no doubts that we'll be back onto you again to do another video. So for the moment, thank you very much and bye for now.
Pleasure. Thank you, Peter. Goodbye.